take a look at Mark chapter 6, if you don't mind. We're going to do the same story twice. We'll talk about part of the story in this lesson, and then the next lesson we'll talk about the B part. On Sunday morning, Lord willing, we'll look at Hebrews 11 and 12, and then we're going to look at Romans 5. Mark chapter 6, verse 45. Immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent them away, he departed to the mountain to pray. Now when evening came, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on land. Then he saw them straining at rowing, for the wind was against them. And now about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. And he would have passed by them. And when they saw him walking on the sea, they supposed it was a ghost. And they cried out, for all saw him and were troubled. And immediately he said to them, be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid. So you got these guys. The Sea of Galilee is probably 6 miles wide at its widest place. Its northern border has these tall little mountains. And so you get a thermal inversion. You get the hot air comes up and the cold air comes down. And a lot of times when that thermal inversion happens, you get these really pop-up little microcells that cause storms on this little lake. So he's with his disciples and they're on this side of the lake. And oftentimes Jesus will use a lake as a barrier. They'll go across to get him away from the multitudes. The subtext of Jesus' ministry is he's got 3 years to get these guys ready for when he leaves. And a lot of times being around a huge crowd of people is difficult to train these guys. And so a lot of times he's going to find some alone time. So he sends them across the sea. He goes up into the mountain to pray. And he prays, it's evening, and he prays till the fourth watch of the night. Now assuming that Mark, and we think Mark was written mainly to a Roman audience, the Romans divided the night 6 to 9, 9 to midnight, midnight to 3, and 3 till dawn. That was the first, second, third, and fourth watch of the night. The Jewish people kept time that the day began at sundown and ended at sundown because of the creation story. And the evening and the morning were the first day. Not the morning and the evening, but the evening and the morning. So when you read the New Testament, you got to decide whose watch they're looking at. Okay, I'm in South Carolina. At home, it's 10:30 because I live in the other time warp called Central Standard Time. And so a lot of times that's why you get that. Jesus cried out at the 6th hour, and the other writer will say that it was the 3rd hour, and it depends on you using Roman or you using Greek time or Jewish time. So Jesus is in the mountain. The disciples are trying. Now, let's assume that it got dark at 8 o'clock. That's first watch of the night. They get in this boat and they try to cross this little lake. The furthest they could go is 6 miles. So they're probably smart enough to cross at a narrow place. Peter, Andrew, James, and John, at least 4 of these guys are experienced fishermen. At least 4 of these guys know the water. At least 4 of these guys have been on boats before. It's the 4th watch of the night. It's somewhere between 3 and 6, and these guys have been on the water since 8 or 9, and they can't cross the water? Hey, there's a problem here. I've been in 2 good boat wrecks. It's one of those things. Was in a Ski Supreme, 540 horsepower, and the driver of the boat sent it toward the bank. I did what every good Jedi would do and left the building. I saw the bank coming. I rolled out of the back, and when I came out of the water, the boat was sitting in the trees, and I got the people out of the water. And then we were bow fishing one night in the Tennessee River, and something caught the bottom of the boat. Not a live something, but an obstacle, and it stopped the boat, and water came in the back. The boat stood up and went out from under us. Well, the water wasn't very deep. I'm 5'4". Deep water means different to me than it does to you, okay? I had an igloo cooler. I spent an hour and a half floating in the Tennessee River on this cooler till folk could get us out. It's a little spooky to be in the water. And the Tennessee River is flat and calm. These guys are in a storm. 4 experienced fishermen. And they're fighting the waves and they're rowing hard against it. And Jesus decides, well, I'm going to cross the water. And he walks across. And he's going to walk by these guys. They're fishermen. They know what they're doing. They're afraid he's not. He doesn't comprehend that they should even be afraid. But as he starts to pass by them, the first thing is, you're in the middle of a storm. Jewish people are super superstitious. I'm not superstitious, I'm a little stitious. Travis Creasy says, but they're super superstitious about water. There's one of those things, when Jesus says, tie a millstone around his neck, throw him in the sea, that's like you being told, I'm burying in a box of snakes. They did not like the water. Okay? They didn't have a super strong navy. Solomon had a little bit of a navy. So they're terrified of the water anyway, and it's between 3 a.m. and daylight, and you're fighting this storm, and you've been in the storm all night, and you're superstitious about water, and you look out, and what do you see? A dude walking on the water. That's not normal. That's not something you see all the time, right? So it's like, now they not only think that it's a storm and they're going to drown in this water, but they think there's a spirit on the water, a water elemental. And so they scream, ah! He says, do not be afraid, be of good cheer, it is I. Now you want to do your first Devo lesson? There's your 3 points. Don't be afraid, have a cheerful attitude, because you rest in the identity of Jesus. So he's walking on the water. They're afraid. He says, be of good cheer. Do not be afraid. It is I. And then he went up into the boat. And when he got into the boat, the wind ceased. Now, the circumstances that they were in didn't really concern the Lord. The circumstances they were in really concerned them. And one of the points we'll make out of the book of Hebrews is that your faith doesn't control your circumstances. Being a person of faith doesn't mean life will be easy, cool, fun, or convenient. But we don't let our circumstances control our faith. But very often, we have a faith crisis when we don't like the circumstances we're in, and we think it's bad and terrible and we should panic. And when God looks at it, it's really not a big deal to Him because He understands things better than we do. Now, there's some things that aren't a big disaster. My daughter got a haircut one time, and she got a haircut. That was the end of the world. Hair grows back. Well, theoretically, but I know her hair's going to. She's going to change her hairstyle 100 times. Okay, I've been married to a blonde, a brunette, a redhead, a curly-haired woman, and that awkward 2 weeks that lady with green hair lived at our house. All the same woman, but she dyes her hair. You know, people learn to do that. And so she's in a major crisis. My hair is cut too short. It'll grow back, baby. Jesus is walking across the sea, and these guys think that the conditions of the water are a big deal, and Jesus is walking on it. It's not a big deal to him. But when God realizes that we're focusing more on the circumstances than we are Him, sometimes God gets in the boat with us to show us it's okay. So Jesus gets in the boat, and when He gets in the boat, it just calms down. Now, that would be scarier. That would be scarier than a guy walking on the water, I think. Because when he steps in the boat, and one of the versions is you find that Jesus can look at a storm and rebuke it. We don't know that He said anything. He got in the boat and it just chills. And so He gets in the boat and the wind ceased. And they were greatly amazed in themselves beyond measure and marveled. So when Jesus, it's enough He's walking on the water, but then when He walks in the water, He hops in the boat and these guys are like, What just happened? Oh my. This man stepped in the boat because we were afraid, and the whole place chilled out. Have you ever been awestruck by anything? See somebody do something crazy amazing? You ever seen something that was unbelievable? You ever had a moment where you thought God was behaving in a way that was unbelievable? It takes something to do to really challenge your faith. Take a notebook, take the notepad on your iPhone or whatever it is that you use, and keep a prayer journal. For 6 weeks, write down everything you pray about. And 6 weeks later, go back and look at it. You might really be surprised about how active God is in your prayer life. Now, God will answer your prayers, yes. God will answer your prayers, no. God will answer your prayers in ways you don't expect. But what happens is I pray about something on Monday, and before I recognize the solution to that, I've got another crisis on Wednesday, and I pray about that. And I'm always right here, right now, focused on my crisis, and I fail to see the amazing hand of God in my life. When I want to make a major decision, and I really, really want to make a decision, I typically say, God, this is something I'm intending to do. This is something I'm trying to do. This is something I want to do. And here's the 3 things that keep me from doing it. If those 3 things stay in place, I don't do it. But if those things suddenly go away, I feel like that's an open door answer to prayer. Now, prayer's an interesting thing. It's like you live, I call it the valley of prayer. That wall of the canyon represents God's will, God's law, and this wall over here represents man's free will. God will not violate His law. Hey, God, my neighbor's not a Christian. He's never been baptized, but let him be saved anyway. God can't do that. God won't violate His own law. God, my neighbor's not a Christian. He won't have a Bible study with me. Zap him and make him be baptized. God's not going to do that and violate His. God won't violate His law. God won't violate your free will. But other than that, anything in the valley of prayer between those 2 walls, you can pray for. That's super, super powerful. And something I just recently tried to explain, circumstances. These guys are in the middle of the waves, and God doesn't really see it as a scary thing, and they're scared to death. It's because God looks at our circumstances differently than we do. Romans 8:28, for we know that all things work together for good of them that love the Lord and are called according to His purpose. We can be conformed to the suffering of Christ. To really understand Romans 8, and when something tragic happens, and somebody tells you, well, God has a plan. Understand those people are benevolently stupid. Okay? They're trying to say things to make you feel better, but that's not the way God works. God doesn't give little children cancer. God doesn't kill teenagers in car wrecks. God doesn't fly airplanes into buildings. God doesn't create the SARS virus, and God doesn't create COVID. To really understand the sovereignty of God, and by sovereignty I mean the power, to really understand how powerful God is God takes things that He did not cause and conforms them to His will to bless His children. Here's something God didn't initiate, and God says, okay, yeah, but I'll use that here. No, I'm evil and I'm mean and I did this to hurt people, and God says, yeah, but I'll use it as a blessing. How cool would that be if you had that kind of power? I don't want to chase too many rabbits. I do around in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. The portion of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu I do is absolutely 100% pure self-defense. And so you put your hands on me, I'm going to either create space or there'll be no space between us. Just the way it works. Now, when you start trying to do dumb stuff, if I suck in all the space between us and you push away from me, you've given me a long lever. If you get too close to me, you give me access to your neck and I put you to sleep. It's like the verse in Amos 5:19. A man ran into a lion, and when he ran from the lion, he ran into a bear. And when he ran from the bear, he went to his house, and when he leaned on the wall, a snake bit him. That's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I can take something that I didn't create. You can do something that looks like you're being mean to me, and I turn it into my advantage. It's a cool thing about that hobby of mine. Well, this is way beyond that. God says I can take life, I can take death, I can take tornadoes, I can take wars, I can take cancer. I can take anything the devil can initiate, and I'm so much more powerful than him. I can take anything he does, and I can conform it to my will to bless my children. We don't have to get wrapped up in the circumstances. So sometimes we're in the middle of the boat, and the storm is raging, and we see Jesus about to walk by, say, Lord, you don't understand. And the Lord actually says, no, you don't understand. In this occasion, he steps into the boat and changes the circumstances. And when he changes the circumstance, when he takes those circumstances that he didn't initiate and conforms them to his will and creates a peaceful sea, it blows the disciples' minds. They don't understand. They're amazed. I like the way it words it in the New King James. They were amazed beyond measure and marveled. They're like, at the break, asked to see a video of my granddaughter. I make this rock disappear, and I pulled out a gunner's belly button. And they asked little 2-year-old Rowan, where did it go? She goes, I don't know. They're amazed beyond measure. And these guys don't understand what's just happened. And then Mark leaves the story and makes an editorial comment. Now, you got to understand, John Mark was not an apostle. You read the last part of the Gospel of Mark, and it says that the night they came to arrest Jesus, they went to his mother's house looking for Jesus, and they went to the Garden of Gethsemane, and a young man followed them wrapped in just a bedcloth. And one of the soldiers grabs the bedcloth, and the young man runs away, leaves the bedcloth. The only guy who would know that story is guess who? The guy who owned the bedcloth. So this is Mark. Mark knows these disciples, knows these apostles, and as he tells this story from hearing them tell it and through inspiration, notice what he says about them. And they were amazed beyond measure and marveled, verse 52, for they had not understood about the loaves because their hearts were hardened. What? Mark says these guys are in the middle of a storm, and they have this terrified reaction, and they see Jesus walking by, and they assume he's a demon or a water spirit, and they start screaming out, and Jesus says, don't be afraid, it's I, be of good cheer. And when he steps into the boat, and these guys are beside themselves with like, I can't believe what just happened. And Mark says it's because they didn't understand about the loaves. What loaves? Well, see, before Jesus sends the crowds away, and before Jesus makes them get in the boat, and before he sends them off, and before he goes to the mountain, he's got a crowd of people around him. They followed him out here into the wilderness on the other side of the lake. He's probably there trying to talk to the disciples. They're just around him, and of course he's going to teach. He's going to talk, and he looks up and he realizes how late it is. And one of his disciples says, Lord, this is a desert place. It's late, and these people are hungry. And Jesus says, will you go buy something to eat? Whoa, Lord, you couldn't work for 6 months and get enough food for everybody just to have a little bit. When you do the math, they're only counting the men here. And you read the story, and there's 5,000 men. So let's suppose we're going to have fish sticks for lunch. If I'm going to have fish sticks and I need to give everybody in the crowd one fish stick and there's 5,000 people there, how many fish sticks do I need? Yes. You did a lot better with that than you did with the pots of water last night. If I'm going to feed everybody 2 fish sticks and I got 5,000 people there, how many fish sticks do I need?
10,000.
3 fish sticks? They can be taught, okay? What do they have when it comes time to feed these people fish sticks? 5 loaves, 2 fish. That's a pack of saltine crackers and a can of sardines. That's not enough to start a good fight over. Okay? You know, you walk up to one of these teenage boys and go, here's lunch. It's a sleeve of crackers and a can of sardines. That's not enough to insult him. Okay? It's teenage boys eating is amazing. Have you noticed that? When I was in full-time youth ministry, it was 1 large pizza for every 4 teenage boys. So you count your crowd. How many teenage boys you got? You got 8 teenage boys. That's 2 large pizzas. That'll feed the whole room. 1 large pizza for every 4 teenage boys. You go to a football camp and it's 1 large pizza for every boy that's there. Because a linebacker will eat. They show up to this thing and the numbers we have are 5,000 men and they have 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Amounts don't count. And so Jesus says, sit them down in companies. And he starts handing out food, and starts handing out food, and starts handing out food, and starts handing out food. And what happens at the end of that story? You got 12 baskets of leftovers. I'm in the water. It's a storm. My circumstances are bad. And I think God's going to walk right by me because he's not concerned about my... It's not that God's not concerned about my circumstances. God doesn't see my circumstances as bad as I see my circumstances. And God can take something that he didn't initiate and conform it to his will. And Mark says the reason they were so amazed that Jesus could calm the storm is they didn't understand about the thing he did with the fish and the loaves. What did they not understand? If Jesus can take 5 loaves and 2 fish and feed 5,000 people and get 12 baskets of leftovers, can he handle a little windstorm? If Jesus can save your soul, can he handle your parents' divorce? Can he handle your diagnosis of cancer? Can he handle the fact that you get picked on at school? Can he deal with the fact that you have some self-esteem issues? Can he handle your anxiety or your depression? I'm not saying he'll make it go away, because some anxiety and depression is a medical condition. But see, what happens in our faith is we compartmentalize our faith. We give God the power to create the world and the power to solve the sin problem, but God can't handle the fact that I'm a teenager. I bet he can. God can't handle the fact that I had to move schools. God can't handle the fact that I've got an incurable disease. God can't handle the fact that my mom and dad aren't getting along. God can't handle the fact that one of my parents is an addict. God can't handle the fact that I've got an addiction. No, God can handle that. And what we've got to understand, what faith teaches, is God can take things, circumstances he didn't create, and conform them to his will to bless his children. And they're in the boat and they're terrified and amazed because they didn't understand the message of the loaves. And what's the message of the loaves? God can take the improbable and do the impossible. Now, what's necessary, what has to happen to feed 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish? What absolutely has to happen? Pardon?
Miracle.
A miracle? Yes. What else has to happen? Pardon? Somebody's got to give the fish up. What? I can do a miracle with 5 loaves and 2 fish, but I need your fish. I need your loaves. What happens if I don't give God control of my bread and my fish? What happens if I don't give God my academics, my athletics, my strength, my beauty, my artistic ability? What happens if I decide I'm going to work this out myself? I don't know what y'all are going to eat. I'm having lunch. It's not how much faith you have, but who controls that. And it's not how much resources you have, but whether or not I let God control those resources. Because I can be a stingy little boy hanging on my 5 loaves and my 2 fish, and guess who has lunch? That would be me. But if I give that to God, what happens? Marveled beyond expectation. And once I understand that the 5 loaves and the 2 fish wasn't a cool party trick, it's a thing that says, if you'll take what you think is inadequate, and you'll take that thing that you think is unacceptable, and you'll let God have it, you might be real surprised what kind of story God writes to your ending, or what kind of ending God writes to your story. Because if I'm writing that, everybody gets lunch. But when God writes it, everybody gets lunch and has 12 leftovers. 12 baskets of leftovers. We get so involved in faith or lack of faith that we try to write our own endings. We try to see it from our perspective. And in their perspective, there's not enough food, the wind is contrary, and this is scary. And from God's perspective, I see a banquet with leftovers, a calm sea, and you don't need to be afraid. And it really boils down to the idea of who am I going to let control my resources. And if God can take my 5 loaves and 2 fish and feed everybody, what can God do with me? With my infirmity and with my strength, with my talents and my inadequacies, with my brokenness or my wholeness. But it boils down to the idea of who am I going to let control. And when I give it to God, God can do things that amaze us beyond measure. But the reason we don't give up control is because we don't understand the lesson that was taught with the loaves. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for today. And again, for an example of faith in the Bible that you've taught us by inspiration, a story that we could share and understand. Father, bless us as we eat. Bless the food that we're about to eat. Thank you for the people who provided it, and bless our fellowship while we eat it. Father, give us continued success today. Help us to grow close to one